geographical details, like Cappadocia and Derinkuyu, the colossal underground enigma, Derinkuyu, 1963. An ordinary man in Cappadocia, Turkey, was unaware he was about to change history when he knocked down a wall in his basement. Behind the ruined wall, a hidden room appeared. Behind that room, another. Then, a tunnel plunging into the depths. The man followed it, descending level by level down through solid rock. When archaeologists finally mapped what he had discovered, the scientific community couldn't believe their eyes. The structure before them was an 8-level labyrinth carved from solid volcanic rock. Dropping a full 280 feet into the earth, miles of passages connected thousands of rooms, ventilation shafts, water wells, storage chambers, living quarters, chapels, and even a school. This was Derinkuyu, the largest underground city ever discovered. The architecture of sustained terror. The detail that truly keeps you up at night is the sheer scale of the city. This complex had the capacity to hold 20,000 people, and not just for a few days. For months, perhaps even years. The ventilation system still works today. The wells still provide fresh water. Each level can be completely isolated from the others by massive rolling stone doors that can only be closed from the inside. Once those doors closed, getting in was impossible. Someone built this, and not recently. The earliest sections date back at least 2,800 years. But why? Why would you build a massive city to trap thousands of people 18 levels underground? Who or what exactly were you hiding from behind those stone doors that locked you in? The standard historical answer is invaders. The region suffered incursions by Hittites, Persians, Romans, Arabs, and Mongols for thousands of years. Building a place to hide seems logical, but there's a disturbing flaw in that logic. You don't build such an elaborate underground ecosystem for ordinary raids that last only a few days or weeks. For short-term threats, you could hide in caves or flee to the mountains. Derinkuyu is entirely different. This is the architecture of sustained terror. This is the kind of thing you build when you know the threat isn't temporary, that it will return, and that you will need to vanish underground for months at a time. Furthermore, Derinkuyu isn't alone. Dozens of underground cities and hundreds of smaller tunnel complexes have been found in Cappadocia. Some are even connected to each other by tunnels miles long. It was possible to travel between cities without ever seeing the surface. It's as if an entire civilization moved underground. The real question isn't just who they were running from. It's what they knew that we don't. Building the impossible. Building such an underground city doesn't just sound difficult. It seems quite literally impossible. We're not talking about digging a wine cellar. We're talking about excavating millions of cubic feet of solid volcanic rock by hand, using only bronze and iron tools, with no modern engineering, power tools, or explosives. The rock of Cappadocia, known as tuff, is compressed volcanic ash. This has a good side and a bad side. The good news, when first cut, it is relatively soft and easy to carve. The bad news, it is ultimately still rock. You still have to chip away at it, inch by inch, piece by piece. Even the math is dizzying, considering the 280-foot depth, 18 levels, and the massive area it covers with its passages. Even conservative estimates put the volume of removed rock at around 2.5 million cubic feet. That means a colossal pile of rubble that had to go somewhere. So, where did this rock go? There is no giant mountain of waste or ancient quarry near the city. Millions of cubic feet of rock seemingly vanished into thin air. Either they hauled it miles away, or they ground it into dust and scattered it. Given the labor force of the time, both options are mind-boggling. Flawless engineering in pitch blackness. The more terrifying part is that they didn't just dig down. They carved. The rooms have smooth walls, curved ceilings, and decorative columns. Some passages have stairs cut directly into the rock. The ventilation shafts descend with flawless verticality for hundreds of feet. The water wells are narrow and highly precise. This wasn't a mining operation. This was colossal sculpture, and they did all of this in pitch blackness. You are hundreds of feet underground. No windows, no natural light. You are working solely by oil lamps or torches. The smoke from your light source fills the room you are in. You can barely breathe, barely see. And under these conditions, you are carving flawless architectural details into solid rock. The ventilation system alone is a miracle in itself. There are 52 ventilation shafts in Derinkuyu, running from the surface down to the lowest levels. Some are over 180 feet deep. They are about 3 feet wide, perfectly straight, and flawlessly vertical. How do you carve a 180-foot vertical shaft through solid rock with such perfection? Starting from the surface and working your way down, using the technology of that era. These questions still echo in the darkness of the tunnels. The blind descent, engineering the impossible. If you are digging a hole straight down into the earth, the logistical nightmares pile up instantly. How do you haul the heavy rubble out? How do you supply the workers at the bottom? How do you prevent the shaft from caving in on them? Here is the ultimate paradox. The ventilation shafts had to be finished first. Without airflow, the workers would suffocate long before they could hollow out living quarters for 20,000 people. This means the very first engineers had to dig these deep, vertical shafts completely blind. They didn't know if the rock would hold, and they didn't know if the physics of the airflow would actually work. They just carved their way down into the darkness, banking on hope and raw calculation. The deeper you look, the more staggering the engineering becomes. Those shafts don't just act as passive chimneys. They are strategically positioned to create a natural thermodynamic cycle. Warm, stale air naturally rises and escapes through specific shafts, which in turn acts as a vacuum, pulling crisp, cool air down through others. Without a single mechanical fan or pump, this massive subterranean complex literally breathes. The aquifer, whisperers, the water system, is just as baffling. Wells pierce through the city, tapping directly into deep underground aquifers. Some of these shafts plunge straight down for over 180 feet. They are terrifyingly narrow, barely 2 feet wide, carved through solid rock until they hit water. But here is the detail that defies belief: the precision. The wells strike water at exact, varying levels. This implies that whoever designed Derinkuyu possessed an almost supernatural understanding of the local geology. They mapped out hidden underground rivers they couldn't even see. There is no room for trial and error when you're carving through solid volcanic rock. You can't dig a 180-foot test well, realize you missed the aquifer, and just try again 10 feet to the left. Every single well had to work on the very first attempt. The planning had to be flawless. The point of no return. We have the legendary rolling stone doors. Imagine massive circular stone slabs up to 5 feet in diameter, 1 to 2 feet thick, and weighing anywhere from 400 to 1,000 pounds. They rest on tracks meticulously carved right into the floor. Carving a perfectly balanced half-ton stone wheel is a monumental task. Installing it to roll smoothly in the pitch blackness, hundreds of feet underground, is another entirely. But the most chilling detail about these doors is their design. They only lock from the inside. There is a hole carved through the center of each stone. To close it, you insert a thick wooden pole into the hole and roll the massive slab across the passageway. Once shut, there are no handles, no hinges, and no mechanisms on the outside. This tells us something profound about their mindset. This wasn't a traditional fortress where warriors could sally out to fight an enemy. It was designed as a sealed tomb. You went in, locked the heavy stone behind you, and prayed that whatever nightmare was roaming the surface would eventually give up and leave. The architecture of desperation, the very layout of the city, maps out the psychology of their fear. The upper levels, simple and utilitarian. You find stables for livestock, basic storage, and temporary holding areas. If you were just hiding from a quick, passing raid, you stayed up here, rolled the first door shut, and waited it out. The middle levels, as you descend, the complexity deepens. You find kitchens, schools, churches, and communal meeting halls. These were spaces designed for long-term survival, for keeping a society functioning underground. The lowest levels, the most isolated, suffocatingly deep, and heavily protected by multiple stone doors. This was the absolute last refuge. The city was built in literal layers of increasing desperation. Life in the shadows. What haunts me the most is the undeniable proof that it was used. This wasn't just a precautionary bunker that sat empty. The ceilings are permanently stained with the thick soot of thousands of ancient oil lamps. The wells show the wear and tear of centuries of maintenance. Remnants of food were found in the storage chambers. Entire generations of people knew these dark, winding passages better than the sunlit surface above. They knew exactly which tunnel led where, how to navigate in absolute darkness, and how to survive without seeing the sky for months on end. Archaeologists even found children's rooms, tiny chambers with lowered ceilings, littered with carved toys left behind in the dust. These weren't just emergency shelters. They were homes. Children were born and raised down there in the pitch black, learning to live like moles behind locked stone wheels. When you look at those tiny stone toys, you have to ask yourself, what kind of apocalyptic threat makes a life like that necessary? The ghost in the machine, redundancy and resilience. The water system of Derinkuyu wasn't just functional. It was redundant by design. The wells are interconnected by a network of hidden channels. If one well ran dry or was blocked, water would automatically flow from the others. This is a fail-safe system engineered to keep a civilization alive even when parts of the infrastructure failed. Image, close-up of stone-carved drainage and water channels. The passages themselves are a masterpiece of strategic disorientation. They wind, twist, and double back in a way that is deliberately confusing. If an enemy managed to breach the massive stone doors, they wouldn't find a city. They would find a death trap. They would be lost in a stone maze where every corner looks the same. But the residents, they knew every shortcut, every hidden crawl space, and every escape route. And yes, there were escape routes. Tunnels have been discovered that stretch for miles, connecting Derinkuyu to other underground cities. You could flee an entire mountain complex without ever stepping into the sunlight, traveling through solid rock to another sanctuary entirely. The architecture of generational trauma, this level of detail, the contingencies, the backups, the secret exits doesn't suggest a project built in a panic. This was planned, refined, and perfected over centuries. That is what is truly haunting. This level of preparation isn't born from one bad experience. It comes from a threat so consistent, so inevitable, that you spend generations teaching your children how to live in the dark. You don't just build a shelter. You design your entire civilization around the ability to disappear. It is beautiful, genius engineering, all in service of one goal, vanishing from the face of the earth and praying that whatever is hunting you above eventually moves on. If you're listening to this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I create these deep dives. Subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these stories travel, the hierarchy of survival, the vertical miracle in a survival situation. The hierarchy is clear. You can last weeks without food, but only days without water. Whoever designed Derinkuyu understood this perfectly. The water system might be the most impressive feat of the entire complex, not because of its size, but because of its security. They didn't just need water. They needed siege-proof water. The main well shaft drops 280 feet straight down through the volcanic tuff. It is roughly 3 feet wide and perfectly vertical. If you dropped a stone from the surface, it would fall to the bottom without ever grazing the sides. Think about the logistics. You cannot dig a well like this from the bottom up. You must start at the surface. This means that while thousands of people were carving out rooms in the deep, a team on the surface was drilling down. These two groups had to meet in the middle with surgical precision. They did. Image, diagram of the central well tapping into the deep aquifer. Immune to the surface, the well provided water to every single level. Small sloped channels were carved into the walls, allowing gravity to pull water into collection basins and storage pools on every floor. Because the well tapped into a deep, natural aquifer, the water was naturally filtered by layers of rock. It was clean, cold, and most importantly unreachable from the surface. Even if an invading army found the city, they couldn't poison the water supply. The shafts were designed so that the buckets could only be accessed from the safety of the lower levels. This isn't just a hiding place for a weekend raid. If you're hiding for a few days, you bring clay jars and leather bags. You don't spend decades carving a 280-foot vertical plumbing system. This suggests long-term occupation. At nearby Kamikok, there are similar redundant systems. At Skanuk, the wells form a complex network between levels. These people were obsessed with water because they knew they might be down there for months. Archaeologists estimate that the storage chambers at Derinkuyu alone could hold enough water to sustain 20,000 people for an entire season. They weren't just waiting for the storm to pass. They were prepared to wait forever. The million-gallon question: we are talking about millions of gallons of water stored deep underground, protected by layers of volcanic rock. Why so much? Standard explanations start to crumble when you look at the scale. A traditional siege doesn't quite fit. Ancient armies lacked the logistics to surround a hidden, subterranean complex for months on end. It was too expensive and too difficult. A drought? While Cappadocia can be arid, you don't carve 18 levels of hell to escape a dry spell. You just dig a deeper well on the surface. You move to where the water isn't, lest you can't move. Unless something is preventing you from being on the surface at all. Tactical hydrology. The stone submarina. Water channels in Derinkuyu reveal a level of tactical thinking that borders on the modern flow control. Small stone plugs could block specific channels, diverting water to different levels, or cutting off the supply to the upper floors entirely. Layered defense. If an enemy breached the first few levels, the resonance could seal the deeper sections, cut the water to the occupied floors, and force the invaders to either retreat from thirst or push deeper into a dark, waterless maze. Beside the main well shafts, there are small, cramped chambers. These were guard posts. From here, a single person with a spear could defend the shaft against anyone trying to climb down. But would a human invader really try to climb a wet, 280-foot vertical pipe in total darkness? It seems unlikely. This suggests the defense was for something else, perhaps to prevent the contamination of the source itself. The sanctuary of the pure. Pandemic architecture. Ancient Hittite tablets from the region speak of plagues and sicknesses that sweep through the land. This leads us to a chilling possibility. What if the water system wasn't just about supply, but about isolation? In a world where surface water could be poisoned or carry deadly contagion, Derinkuyu becomes a closed environment. The wells tap into deep filtered through hundreds of feet of stone. The water is virgin. It has never touched the surface. The massive storage capacity allowed the inhabitants to seal the well shafts completely. They didn't need to risk a single connection to the outside world. This is quarantine architecture executed in solid stone. The ability to isolate levels and cut water flow to specific areas is exactly how you would manage a pandemic. If one level became infected, you could seal the stone doors, cut the channels, and ensure the survival of the people below. It's a subterranean life support system built by a civilization that had seen the devastation of unchecked disease. Engineering for eternity. Romans eventually found these systems and called them marvels of engineering. But they didn't build them, they inherited them. Whoever the original architects were, they understood hydrology, pressure, flow rates, and filtration with a sophistication that shouldn't have existed. And here is the most impressive part. It's still working. After thousands of years, the stone hasn't cracked. The channels don't leak. The storage basins still hold water. When you build in rock and you do it right, you are building for eternity. These people knew that the threat, whatever it was, wasn't a one-time event. They knew their grandchildren's grandchildren would eventually have to retreat back into the earth. The final truth of the doors, in the end, it's the doors that make this reality sink in. Not the depth, not the scale, but those massive, rolling stone wheels. When you stand in front of one, you realize this wasn't a theoretical exercise or a temple. This was a response to a recurring nightmare. Those doors were carved to be closed. They were built to separate us from whatever is out there. They are a silent testament to a period of history we still don't fully understand, a time when the only way to survive was to stop being a creature of the sun and become something that lives in the stone. Should we wrap this up into a final, polished script ready for a voiceover? Or would you like to explore the Hittite plague theory in more detail to see if it matches the archaeological timeline? The one-way seal? Engineering for the committed. These are not the doors of a home. They are the hatches of a stone submarine. Massive, circular wheels some 5 feet in diameter and weighing over 1,000 pounds sit in precision-cut tracks. When these doors roll shut, there are no gaps, no cracks, just solid, unyielding volcanic rock. But it's the asymmetry of the design that is truly chilling. The inside, a small hole, about 6 inches across, sits in the center. It's a murder hole designed for a spear. You can defend the door from the safety of the inner chamber, stabbing anyone who tries to tamper with it. The outside, perfectly smooth. There are no handles, no hinges, and no leverage points. If you are on the outside of that door, you aren't getting in. If you're on the inside and the track is blocked, you aren't getting out. This is binary architecture. You are either safe and trapped, or exposed and free. There is no middle ground. The geography of retreat. Most defensive structures are built at the perimeter, the outer wall, the main gate. But Derinkuyu is different. It is divided into sealed segments. Every major corridor, every junction between floors, every critical artery has its own rolling door. This is the architecture of a losing battle. You don't build dozens of internal seals unless you expect to lose ground. You don't create separate zones unless you plan to retreat, level by level, deeper into the earth. If an enemy breaches level 1, you fall back to level 2 and roll the stone. Now the invaders are trapped in a dark maze of empty rooms, staring at 1,000 pounds of rock. They cannot move, while you are safely hundreds of feet below them. What stalks the surface? This raises a question that standard history struggles to answer. Why would a raider follow you? Normal human invaders, Persians, Mongols, Romans want grain, gold, and slaves. They don't want to crawl into a pitch-black, 18-level death trap to fight people hiding behind. They would just burn the surface crops and leave. But the door suggests a threat that is persistent. A threat that doesn't just pass by, but one that searches, that follows, that waits. The entry doors, functional, designed for a quick seal. The deep doors, absolute fortresses. Heavier, thicker, and reinforced with secondary stone bars and drop locks. The deeper you go, the more the architecture screams. They might get through the first 6 doors, but they must never get through this one. Recurring nightmares. We know these doors weren't just for show. The tracks in the volcanic tuff are polished, smooth. There are deep grooves worn into the stone from centuries of being rolled open and then slammed shut. Whatever they were hiding from, it came back. This wasn't a once-in-a-thousand-year event. It was frequent enough that children were likely drilled on how to roll the stones. It was predictable enough that every generation maintained the tracks, clearing debris and ensuring the half-ton wheels could still be moved by a single person. The choice of the mold today? Some of these doors are jammed, frozen in place by the weight of millennia. But when archaeologists first cleared the tracks, they found that many still worked perfectly. With one firm push from the inside, a single person can still seal a passage today. That is the thought that haunts the mind. Who chooses this? Who looks at their family and decides that the best option is to descend 200 feet into a lightless tomb and roll a stone shut behind them? The doors near the living quarters are different. They are more refined, perhaps handled more often. They weren't just defending a warehouse. They were defending a bedroom. For the people of Derinkuyu, the world above had become so dangerous, so hostile, or so contaminated that the only way to stay human was to live like a ghost. The sentinel in the dark, living behind the wheel. As you descend deeper into Derinkuyu, the doors change. The stone wheels guarding the living quarters are heavier and more reinforced than those near the surface. These weren't just entryways, they were vault doors for the soul of the community. Beside these massive stones, archaeologists found small, carved chambers, guard posts. Image, a narrow stone guard post beside a rolling door at Derinkuyu. These aren't just holes in the wall. They feature carved benches, alcoves for oil lamps, and specialized racks for weapons. This wasn't a temporary assignment. This was a permanent post. Imagine the mental toll. A guard sitting in the crushing silence of the earth, staring at a 1,000-pound stone door for days, waiting for it to move. What kind of threat requires a man with a spear to watch a half-ton rock in the pitch black? Precision against the elements, the engineering goes even deeper than defense. Carved around the edges of these doors are tiny drainage channels. The architects knew that if water from snowmelt or floods seeped past the seal, it could create pressure or erode the track. They designed the city to sip the water away, ensuring the doors would never jam or be forced open by nature itself. But there is a detail that lingers in the mind of every explorer. The marks on the exterior of some doors. There are deep scratches. They aren't the broad marks of a battering ram or the precise chips of an iron chisel. They are scattered and erratic, like something was clawing at the stone. Geologists might call it erosion. Historians might call it water damage. But when you're standing in that passage by lamplight, it looks like something was trying to get in. The labyrinth of death. Tactical claustrophobia. If you somehow made it past the doors, you wouldn't find a city. You would find a killing zone. The tunnels of Derinkuyu were designed with a calculated lethality. Most are only 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. You cannot stand straight. You cannot charge. Your shoulders scrape the rough, volcanic walls. This was intentional. In these narrow veins of rock, a single defender with a spear can hold off an entire army. Numbers mean nothing when you can only face your enemy 101. Image, a person crouched in a narrow, low-ceilinged tunnel in Derinkuyu. The architecture of the ambushta. Passengers used the ceiling as a weapon. The crawl trap. You're walking hunched over when, suddenly, the ceiling drops. You are forced onto your hands and knees. In that moment, you are defenseless. Your weapon is useless, your head is down, and you are blind to what's around the corner. The 30-foot blind spot. The tunnels twist sharply every 20 or 30 feet. You can never see what's ahead. You can't build momentum. You are constantly turning into a potential spear tip. The ghost alcoves. Small one-person niches are carved into the walls at chest height. A defender can press themselves into the shadows of an alcove, wait for you to pass, and step out behind you. The floors are never flat for long. They slope up, then down, then tilt. It's designed to drain your stamina, throw off your balance, and cloud your judgment. And in Derinkuyu, a single mistake is a death sentence, a legacy of perpetual fear. This isn't just clever architecture. It's a recorded trauma. This level of preparation doesn't come from paranoia. It comes from memory. The people who lived here didn't just build these defenses. They maintained them for centuries. They kept the tracks greased, the weapons racked, and the lamps filled. They never felt safe enough to say, "We don't need the doors anymore." They lived with the knowledge that the surface was a temporary luxury, and the stone was their only permanent sanctuary. Even today, after thousands of years, the engineering holds. The doors still roll. The tracks are still level. The city is still waiting, ready to be sealed one more time. It serves as a haunting reminder. Safety is a fragile thing, but stone lasts forever. The fatal architecture. Designed for death traps in Derinkuyu, every architectural choice was a weapon. The passages weren't just narrow for ease of carving. They were engineered to kill you slowly, deliberately, and with cold calculation. 1. The geometry of the ambush. Most tunnels are barely 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. You are forced to move in a permanent crouch, shoulders scraping the cold stone. This is tactical claustrophobia. Irregular steps. Some tunnels feature steps carved into the rock, but they are intentionally irregular, varying in height and depth. You can't find a rhythm. You have to watch your feet, and the moment you look down, you stop watching for the spear coming at your chest. Vertical drop zones. The ventilation shafts, while providing air, also served as deadly chutes. A defender on a higher level could drop stones, boiling water, or hot oil directly onto attackers below. In those narrow shafts, there is no room to dodge and no way to look up. Murder holes. Look up at the ceiling, and you might see a small, unassuming hole. These are murder holes. A defender on the floor above could thrust a spear down through the rock. You wouldn't see your killer. You would only feel the cold bite of iron from the shadows above. 2. Psychological attrition. The city was designed to break an invader's spirit before it broke their body. False doors. Scattered throughout the maze are false doors, stone wheels that look identical to the real. defensive barriers, but are carved directly into the solid rock. They exist only to waste your time, your energy, and your hope. Acoustic chaos, sound behaves strangely 200 feet underground. Echoes bounce off the curved, tough walls, making footsteps sound like they're coming from everywhere at once. You find yourself jumping at shadows, swinging at ghosts, and screaming into a void that only screams back. Environmental stress, the temperature shifts from level to level, stiflingly warm in one passage, bone-chillingly cold in the next. Your body cannot regulate. You're sweating, then shivering, then sliding on floors that have been deliberately kept wet to make your footing uncertain. The invincible fortress traditional military strategy. Siege fails completely at Derinkuyu. You can't starve them out. The storage rooms are packed with years of grain and oil. You can't thirst them out. They have internal access to deep, unpollutable aquifers. You can't smoke them out. The ventilation system is too efficient. Smoke simply rises and escapes through the 52 shafts. You can't dig them out. The volcanic rock is too hard and the complex too vast. By the time a soldier reaches the 7th level, they are exhausted, terrified, and low on oxygen. History shows that by this point, morale collapses. Derinkuyu isn't just a hiding place. It is a fortress of the earth, designed to bleed an enemy dry until the surface world becomes irrelevant. The human cost, life in the eternal shadow beyond the stone and the spears. There is the human side. What does it do to a mind to live for months or years in the dark? Cave syndrome and the loss of time. Humans are creatures of the sun. Our bodies rely on the circadian rhythm, the cycle of day and night, to regulate sleep, mood, and health. In the deep levels of Derinkuyu, real sunlight is a myth. The atmosphere, the air was perpetually thick with the smell of linseed oil and the soot of thousands of lamps. The cave syndrome. Psychologists know that extended isolation in enclosed spaces leads to profound confusion and depression. Without a sun to watch, you lose the concept of a day. The residents had to invent their own time. They likely tracked the hours through communal prayers, shared meals, or by listening to the faint, muffled vibrations of the world above the low rumble of thunder or the distant, heavy rhythm of a storm. A civilization of moles imagined children born into this twilight world, their entire universe consisting of stone corridors and flickering shadows. To them, the surface was a place of danger, a place you only visited when it was safe to breathe. They grew up as a civilization of moles, learning to navigate the maze by touch and memory, surviving in a world where safety meant being buried alive. Every 1,000-pound stone wheel tells us the same thing. The fear was permanent. They never felt safe enough to abandon these defenses. They kept the tracks greased and the guards posted for centuries because they knew something we have forgotten, that the darkness wasn't just a place to hide, but the only place they could truly live. The biological tax, a world without time. The human body is a clock tuned to the sky. In the 1960s, a researcher named Michel Cyphers spent months in a cave without clocks or sunlight to see what would happen. The results were haunting. His sense of time collapsed. He would sleep for 15 hours or stay awake for 30, convinced only a few hours had passed. He suffered from profound memory loss, depression, and vivid hallucinations. Now, multiply that by 20,000 people. Circadian chaos, in the pitch black of the lower levels, day and night ceased to exist. People likely navigated time through the rhythm of communal prayers, the flickering of oil lamps, or the muffled vibrations of surface storms. Vitamin D in decay, without sunlight. The body stops producing vitamin D in the damp dark. Bones grow brittle, muscles ache, and skin turns a ghostly, translucent, pale. Children were the most at risk, their growing bodies warped by the lack of light, their eyes struggling to adjust to a world of shadows. The sensory pressure cooker life in Derinkuyu wasn't quiet. It was an acoustic nightmare. Stone doesn't absorb sound. It amplifies it. Every crying child, every bleeding goat, every whispered argument would bounce off the hard volcanic walls, echoing through the passages. There was no grass to muffle a footstep, no trees to catch the wind, just the constant, grinding noise of thousands of people trapped in a stone bottle. Then, there was the smell. Even with 52 ventilation shafts, the air would be heavy. The aroma of survival was a thick cocktail of linseed oil smoke, animal waste, unwashed bodies, and damp earth. In the deepest levels, where the air moved slowest, breathing wasn't just a reflex, it was a reminder of your confinement. The social breakdown, cabin fever. In stone, psychologists today speak of cabin fever, that restless, explosive irritability that comes from being cooped up. In a sealed underground city, privacy was a luxury that didn't exist. You were always watched, always heard, always crowded. The erosion of trust. History shows that during long sieges, social structures begin to fray. Neighbors turn on each other over a handful of grain. Friends become rivals for a spot near a ventilation shaft. The weight of leadership. Imagine the burden on the elders and teachers in those carved schoolrooms. They had to promise children that the sun still existed, that the monsters or armies above would eventually leave, and that life would one day return to the surface. They were teaching kids who had never seen a tree how to be human. The silent return eventually, the crisis would pass. The massive stone doors would be rolled back, and the survivors would emerge. But the return to the light was likely as painful as the descent into darkness. The sun would be blindingly bright, the wind too sharp, the open horizon too vast. They would blink at a world that felt too big after months of living in a world of 3-foot-wide tunnels. The scars of Derinkuyu weren't just the soot on the ceilings, they were etched into the people themselves. They had traded the sky for safety. They had chosen to live like ghosts so they wouldn't become ghosts. Final thought: the existence of Derinkuyu is proof that humans can adapt to almost anything. We can live in the dark, we can breathe smoke, and we can survive behind a 1,000-pound stone wheel. But it also leaves us with one haunting question. What on earth was happening on the surface that made a lightless, smoky, crowded maze feel like the better option? Whatever it was, the people of Cappadocia didn't just fear it, they prepared for it for eternity. This is the final, sweeping chapter of the Derinkuyu narrative, moving from the psychological toll of the city to the ultimate question: why was it built? This section shifts the focus from human enemies to a planet-wide catastrophe, weaving in historical climate data and ancient myths to create a compelling argument for the climate apocalypse theory. The aftermath, a legacy of trauma. The people of Derinkuyu emerged from the earth not as they had entered. They had survived, but the experience of living like moles for months or years had changed them. The scars of darkness, children born underground, had never seen the sun. They learned to walk in tunnels where they couldn't stand straight. Their world was one of stone, smoke, and shadows. The memory of fear. Even after the crisis passed and life returned to the surface, the fear remained. They didn't abandon the city. They maintained it. They kept the stone doors greased, the oil lamps filled, and the wells clean. They taught their children the routes through the maze, knowing that one day they might need to return. Today, as tourists wander through the lit tunnels, it's easy to see it as a puzzle. But for the people who lived there, every choice was life or death. Every day was a test of endurance. Derinkuyu is a monument to the human capacity for survival, paid for in days of darkness and years of memory. The ultimate theory. The sky falling. As we move from what they endured to why they built it, we have to look beyond simple answers. Standard history points to war invading armies of Persians, Romans, or Mongols. But you don't build an 8-level self-sustaining underground civilization just to hide from a temporary raid. What if the enemy wasn't human? What if the threat wasn't a king or an empire, but the planet itself turning against them? This is the climate apocalypse theory. 1. The science of catastrophe. We know the Earth's climate is volatile. History is punctuated by sudden, violent shifts, supervolcanoes, massive dust storms, and solar anomalies that can block out the sun for years. The volcanic winter, around 1600 BC, the Thera volcano exploded in the Mediterranean, devastating the Minoan civilization and sending an ash cloud across the region that choked the sky for years. Crops failed, temperatures plummeted, and societies collapsed. The year without a summer, in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted in Indonesia. The following year, 1816, snow fell in June in North America and Europe. Crops froze in the fields, leading to widespread famine. The 536 CE fog. Byzantine historians recorded a mysterious fog that dimmed the sun for 18 months, plunging Europe and Asia into a decade-long winter, likely caused by a massive volcanic event. Now, imagine you are a farmer in ancient Cappadocia. The sky turns a sickly orange. The sun is a pale disk behind a veil of gray dust. Summer turns freezing cold. The crops wither, the animals die, and the rivers turn to mud. Don't know what a volcano is. All you know is that the world above ground is dying. 2. The underground ark. In this scenario, Derinkuyu isn't a bunker. It's an ark. Stable environment. Underground, the temperature is constant. The wind can't reach you, the ash can't fall on your head, and the freezing surface winter can't kill you. The mystery storage. This explains the massive storage capacity. They weren't just hiding food. They were hoarding the seeds of civilization: grain, oil, wine, tools, and livestock to restart life once the world above recovered. The water source. The deep internal wells make perfect sense. If surface rivers and lakes were poisoned by toxic ash or mud, the only safe water would be from deep aquifers untouched by the sky. 3. The Bronze Age. Collapse around 1200 BC. The entire eastern Mediterranean civilization hit. Mycenaeans, Egyptians suddenly collapsed. Cities burned, trade routes vanished, and writing disappeared. For decades, historians blamed sea peoples and war, but recent scientific evidence from tree rings and pollen samples points to a massive, multi-decade megadrought. In a world where farming is impossible, society crumbles. People starve, migrate, and fight for resources. In this chaos, an underground city with years of stored food and water is the only lifeline. A global phenomenon. Derinkuyu doesn't exist in a vacuum. All over the world, ancient cultures built elaborate underground shelters. China. The Yadong's massive subterranean homes carved into the lowest plateau, where millions of people still live today. Tunisia. The underground dwellings of Ma, built to escape the intense desert heat. Mysterious myths. Ancient stories from cultures globally speak of times when the sun disappeared, the sky turned to stone, or humanity had to hide in caves to survive a great cataclysm. These might not just be myths. They could be the cultural memory of real climate disasters. Final verdict. The architecture of Fort Derinkuyu was likely built in response to a threat that was both human and environmental. Perhaps it started as a simple shelter and grew over centuries, expanding with every new disaster, became a generational project, a massive insurance policy against the end of the world. When you look at those stone doors, you aren't just seeing a defense against an army. You were seeing a desperate, brilliant attempt by ancient people to survive a planet that was trying to kill them. They built a world of stone to save the world of flesh, and against all odds, they succeeded. This final chapter bridges the gap between the physical stone of Derinkuyu and the ethereal world of human story. If science and climate data give us the how, then mythology and cultural memory give us the why. People don't spend lifetimes digging into the dark because they are bored. They do it because of a story of what happened before and what might happen again. The mythology of survival. Memories in the dark in Malta. There are catacombs. In Scotland, there are souterrain stone tunnels built by ancient farmers. In every corner of the globe, we find the same architecture of fear. While we have no ancient diaries explicitly stating, we built this because the sky turned black, the evidence is written in the stories that have survived for millennia. Ancient people didn't have geology books. They had myths. And myths are often just cultural memories of real disasters, wrapped in the language of gods and monsters. 1. The archetypes of the end. Nearly every major civilization shares a great disaster. Myth. The Mesopotamian flood, in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Cien dos mil cien BC. The gods decide to wipe out humanity. The hero Utnapishtim survives only by building a massive vessel. The Egyptian darkness. The Book of the Dead describes a night that lasted for days, where the sun god Ra had to battle the serpent Apophis. If Ra lost, the sun would never rise. To an Egyptian living through a volcanic ash cloud, this wasn't a metaphor, it was a news report. The Greek winter. The myth of Persephone explains the death of the world. When she is taken to the underworld, her mother Demeter grieves, and the earth freezes. Nothing grows. This is a story of what happens when the seasons break. 2. Fimbulwinter and the long night in northern Europe. The Vikings spoke of Fimbulwinter, so long and so cold that it killed almost everyone, marking the beginning of Ragnarok. In North America, indigenous groups tell of the long darkness, a time when the sun stopped shining and people had to hide in deep caves to stay warm. When you line these stories up with the science, the tree rings, the ice cores, the volcanic ash layers, the fairy tales start to look like survival manuals, myths as blueprints. Imagine growing up in Cappadocia with these stories. Your grandparents tell you about the year the birds died and the sun turned orange. They tell you that safety is below. Over generations, these stories become actions. You don't just tell the myth, you dig the reality. These underground cities are the end result of thousands of years of fear, memory, and planning. The myths told the people what was possible, and the stone provided the answer. Even the Turkish legends speak of sleeping earths and cities built by giants to hide from the wrath of heaven, the shift from the sky to the sword. But myths weren't the only warnings. As time went on, the threat became more tangible. It wasn't just the gods or the weather. It was other humans. History is a record of violence. Some of the oldest skeletons ever found show signs of battle skulls shattered by axes, bones broken by war. In a world without borders or police, trust was a luxury. If a group of strangers appeared over the hill, you had two choices: trust them or vanish. 1. The human predator. Cappadocia is a landscape of hidden valleys and sudden cliffs. It is perfect for an ambush. Raiders could strike and disappear before you could even arm yourself. The scars of war. When archaeologists excavate ancient settlements, they find burned houses, broken pottery, and arrowheads embedded in the walls. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC. More than 40 major cities across the Mediterranean were wiped out in a single generation. Letters on clay tablets from this era scream for help. The enemy is at the gates. 2. The final refuge in this world of chaos. Derinkuyu becomes a fortress. You can't farm when raiders are burning your fields. You can't sleep when you are outnumbered. But if you have a city that the enemy cannot find and cannot enter, even if they do, you have a chance. The genius of Derinkuyu is that it answered every fear, If the sky turned black, the air shafts and wells kept you alive. If the gods sent a flood, the drainage channels moved the water away. If men came with swords, the 1,000-pound stone doors locked them out. The lessons of the dark weather: it was a climate apocalypse or a human invasion. The people of Cappadocia chose the darkness over the risk of the surface. They traded the open sky for the security of the stone. It makes you wonder, what are we building today? We have our own myths, our own fears, and our own underground spaces. We might not be carving stone, but we are still looking for ways to survive the unthinkable. Derinkuyu is a reminder that fear shapes us, but hope is what we build. They dug deep because they believed there was a future worth saving, even if that future had to wait in the dark for the world to heal.
The contagion of fear and the logic of stone fear is infectious. When a neighboring city falls, the panic doesn't stop at your border. You have three choices: run, fight, or hide. The people of Cappadocia chose the third option, but on a monumental scale. Why build an underground city instead of a fortress? Walls can be breached, castles can be besieged, but a hidden city carved into the earth offers something else: invisibility and time. You don't just hold out, you vanish. You wait for the threat, be it an army or a band of raiders, to move on. Derinkuyu wasn't just a shelter, it was a fortress of denial. The stone doors, massive, 1,000-pound wheels that could only be closed from the inside. They weren't built to stop animals. They were designed to stop determined human attackers. Strategic layout. The city's design is a masterclass in defense. Narrow passages act as choke points where a few defenders could hold off many. Confusing layouts, dead ends, and hidden escape routes were all designed to bewilder an invading force. The relentless threat, Cappadocia was a highway for empires: Hittites, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Mongols. Each wave brought new dangers, but it didn't take an army to spread terror. A rumor of raiders nearby was enough to send a community underground. Scale of survival. Derinkuyu could house up to 20,000 people. This wasn't a few families hiding in a cave. It was massive, organized, collective action. The warning system. How did they know when to hide? Theories suggest a network of watchers on hills using smoke signals, mirrors, or runners to sound the alarm. Hidden entrances. The entrances were masterfully disguised. Inside wells, behind animal pens, within churches. You could walk right past one and never know it was there. Life under pressure. Once the doors were sealed, a new set of challenges began. Silence was survival. No smoke could escape, no noise could drift up. The city's design helped muffle sound and disperse smoke through winding shafts. A world in miniature. Life had to continue. They had storage for months of food, wells for water, stables for livestock, chapels for worship, and schools for children. They tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy under extraordinary duress. The social strain. Living in cramped, dark quarters for weeks or months would have been psychologically grueling. Strict rules were likely in place to manage resources and maintain order. Trust was essential. One person's mistake could doom everyone. The evolution of fear. Why did this fear become so deeply ingrained? Historical trauma. The memory of past attacks would have been passed down through generations, turning the act of hiding into a cultural tradition. The power of the crowd. When everyone around you believes that going underground is the only way to survive, you follow. Fear becomes a unifying force. Deterrence. The very existence of such a massive hiding place might have acted as a deterrent. Why attack a city that can simply disappear? The comfort of the cave. It's easy to focus on the terror, but there's another side to Derinkuyu. For some, the underground might have offered a strange kind of comfort. Stable environment. While the surface world sweltered in summer and froze in winter, the temperature underground remained a constant cool 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius. The earth was a natural blanket. The sound of safety. The silence below ground, muffled by thick rock, could be seen as a sanctuary from the chaotic noise of the surface world. Community bond. In the tight quarters, people relied on each other. They shared meals, chores, and fears. This enforced togetherness could create powerful bonds of community. Finding normalcy in the dark, humans are adaptable. They found ways to make life bearable, even normal, in the dark. Kitchens and smoke. Kitchens were strategically placed near air shafts to vent smoke secretly. They likely ate simple, stored foods. The rhythm of light. Oil lamps provided dim light, creating a world of soft shadows. People's eyes would adjust, and they would learn to navigate by touch and memory. Art and ritual. Simple carvings, crosses, and symbols on the walls show a need to personalize the space and find meaning through faith. Chapels and prayer rooms were vital for maintaining hope. Daily life. There was work to do: cooking, cleaning, caring for children and animals. They likely told stories, played games, and found ways to pass the time. The blurred line between hiding and living.
Even kings can't stop a flood, but a family can close a stone door. This control brings a sense of peace. It's like building a world within the world, a space where the rules are yours. For a while, at least, you get to decide what happens. There's a kind of comfort in the earth itself. Some people today feel anxious in open spaces, but calm in closed ones. The weight of stone above feels protective, not crushing. It's like being wrapped up tight, shielded from the wildness outside. Maybe for ancient people, this feeling was even stronger. Now, let's talk about time. Underground, time changes. There's no sunrise or sunset. Days blur together. People had to invent new ways to mark time. Maybe it was meals, rituals, or just the feeling in their bones. Some archaeologists think people used water clocks, simple bowls that filled and emptied at steady rates to keep track of hours. Others say it came down to routine. You do what needs to be done when it needs doing. This timelessness can be soothing. Above ground, you race the sun. Below, you move at your own pace. No rush, nothing chasing you. Just the slow, steady rhythm of life beneath the earth. Let's not ignore the hard parts. Living underground wasn't easy. Tempers could flare. Space was tight. Secrets were hard to keep. But there are signs people managed conflict. Some rooms are set apart, maybe for elders, leaders, or people who needed quiet. There are council spaces where decisions were likely made. Even in the dark, humans find ways to organize, to lead, to follow. Here's another angle, the idea of memory. When people came back to the surface, they carried the underground with them. Stories about the time below, lessons about trust, patience, and survival. Maybe these stories turned into family legends passed down for generations. When the world was dangerous, we went below. We waited. We came back stronger. There's a pattern here across history. After a disaster, people don't just rebuild what they lost. They add new layers. They keep some habits from the time of crisis. Maybe they keep food hidden in a cave just in case. Maybe they build new tunnels or teach their children to listen for danger. The underground becomes part of the culture. Let's look at one more piece of evidence. Artifacts left behind. Archaeologists have found toys carved from wood, spinning tops, little animals. These weren't just for passing the time. They show that, even in fear, people made room for joy. They gave their children something to hold and play with, to remind them the world wasn't only danger and darkness. There's also music. Simple flutes, drums, and rattles. Imagine the sound echoing of stone walls, filling the city with rhythm. Maybe people sang to keep their spirits up or to help children sleep. Maybe music was a way to say, we're still here. We haven't given up. There's evidence of trade too. Even in hiding, people didn't cut themselves off from the world. Some storage rooms held goods from far away, shelves from the coast, fabrics dyed with rare colors, beads of glass. Maybe traders visited in peaceful times. Maybe people snuck out to trade, then returned to safety. The underground city wasn't a prison. It was a base, a home, a hub. Now, let's think about the big picture. Why did people keep using these cities even after the first danger passed? Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was the only way to feel safe. Or maybe over time, people just liked it. The earth became a second skin. Here's the thing. Survival is about more than just staying alive. It's about making life worth living, even in the worst conditions. The evidence from Derinkuyu and places like it shows that people didn't just wait for the storm to end. They built a life. They made rules, shared food, sang songs. They found comfort in each other and in the earth itself. When you look at all this, it's hard not to feel a little awe. Humans are stubborn. We don't just accept what the world gives us. We build, we carve, we adapt. Even when forced underground, we find a way to thrive. So the next time you hear about Derinkuyu, don't just picture fear. Picture warmth, laughter, routine. Picture a world where the earth itself became a shelter, a home, a womb, a place where people found safety, not just from enemies, but from the chaos of the world, and maybe somewhere deep inside,